I'm Liam, 32 male. I live alone in a modest apartment in the city and I work as a data analyst, which means my life revolves around finding patterns in chaos. For years, the one chaotic dataset I could never make sense of was my own family, specifically my mother's cruel and unpredictable favoritism towards my younger brother. I was about to confront that chaos head-on, not knowing it would nearly cost me my sanity. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Growing up, I never thought of our family as unusual. It was just the way things were. My mother, Sharon, was the sun and the rest of us were planets in her orbit. My father, a quiet man who passed away when I was in college, orbited at a safe distance, rarely interfering. My younger brother, Ethan, was her Mercury, held in a tight, warm embrace. And I was Pluto, technically part of the system, but so far out that my existence often felt like an afterthought. It wasn't a malicious, overt cruelty in the early days. It was 1,000 tiny cuts, a constant, low-humming message that my value was conditional, while Ethan's was absolute. My job is to look at numbers and find the story they're telling. If I were to plot my childhood on a graph, the trend line of maternal affection would show a stark divergence. For Ethan, a steep upward curve of praise, gifts, and attention. For me, a flat line punctuated by occasional conditional peaks when I achieved something she could brag about. I won the state science fair in 10th grade. The peak lasted 2 days, during which she called every relative to talk about my brilliant son. The moment the trophy started collecting dust, the line flatlined again. Meanwhile, Ethan could get a C on a test, and she would praise his creative thinking that teachers just didn't understand. This dynamic solidified as we grew older. I got a scholarship to a good university and worked 2 jobs to cover my living expenses. She told relatives I was stubbornly independent. When Ethan decided college wasn't for him after 1 semester, she funded a series of his business ventures that evaporated faster than morning mist. There was the gourmet dog treat bakery. He didn't own a dog, the dropshipping business for artisanal phone cases he spent the seed money on a vacation, and the app that would revolutionize social networking. It never got past a logo design. Each failure was met with her comforting words. "The world just isn't ready for your vision, sweetie." Each time, she'd refinance something or dip into her retirement savings, which she'd inherited from my dad, to fund the next one. I tried to talk to her about it once when I was 25. I'd just been promoted at my first real job and I called her, excited to share the news. She listened for about 30 seconds before interrupting. "That's nice, dear. Listen, I have to run. Ethan's car broke down again and the tow truck driver is being so rude to him. The poor thing is so stressed." Click. I remember staring at the phone, the pride I felt just moments before curdling into that familiar, bitter resignation. I never brought up my career with her again. The gaslighting, though I didn't have a name for it then, was a constant undercurrent. Any attempt to point out the disparity was met with a bewildered expression and a series of deflections that were designed to make me feel like the crazy one. "Liam, why would you say that? I love you both exactly the same," she'd say, her voice dripping with wounded sincerity. "You're being far too sensitive. You always read into things." Or the real killer, "Maybe you're just jealous of your brother's free spirit." It was a masterclass in psychological defense. She would construct a reality where her actions were perfectly logical and my feelings were a hysterical overreaction. After a while, you just stop trying. It's easier to accept the flat line than to keep fighting for a peak you know will never come. You learn to live in the cold outer orbit. My Aunt Carol, my mother's younger sister, was a peripheral character during these years. She and my mother had a complicated relationship, prone to long periods of silence followed by brief, intense reconciliations. Carol was quiet, observant, a librarian who seemed to prefer the company of books to people. She always sent me a birthday card with $20 in it every single year without fail. It was a small, consistent gesture that felt more genuine than any of my mother's grand, performative displays of affection that were always, somehow, directed at Ethan even when they were supposedly for me. The older I got, the more the financial support for Ethan escalated. I knew my dad had left my mom well provided for. He was a meticulous planner. But even a solid nest egg has a bottom. On her 58th birthday, I overheard her on the phone with her financial advisor, her voice tight with anxiety. "I know it's a significant withdrawal," she was saying, "but it's an investment. Ethan's new project is a sure thing." That was for a wellness retreat he wanted to start in another state, which required a down payment on a property. The project, like all the others, fizzled out within months, but not before she had sunk nearly 6 figures into it. I lived my life on a separate track. I built a career, had friends, dated. I prided myself on my self-sufficiency. I never asked my mother for a dime, not because I was stubbornly independent, but because I knew with absolute certainty that the answer would be no. The bank of Mom was open for one customer only, and yet I still showed up. I came for holidays. I called on her birthday. I played the part of the dutiful son because I held onto a sliver of hope that one day she would see me. Not the reliable, boring, self-sufficient son who was no trouble, but just me. A person worthy of the same unconditional love and support she gave so freely to my brother. It was a fool's hope, and the foundation of that hope was about to be shattered in the most brutal way imaginable. The catalyst for it all was, ironically, my own birthday. A day that was supposed to be about me but, as always, would end up being about Ethan. For my 32nd birthday, I wanted nothing. No party, no big dinner. The thought of another forced family gathering where I'd have to watch Ethan be celebrated for simply existing was exhausting. I told my mom I was just going to have a quiet night in, but she insisted. Nonsense, Liam, 32 is a number we have to celebrate. She proposed a special dinner. She would use a recipe from my grandmother, my dad's mom, for beef bourguignon. It was my favorite meal as a kid, one she hadn't made in at least 15 years. It was a deeply nostalgic and personal choice, and for a moment I let my guard down. Maybe this time would be different. She made a specific promise. "This will be your night, Liam," she said over the phone, her voice uncharacteristically warm. "Just you, me, and Ethan, no distractions, we'll celebrate you." That promise, that simple collection of words, was the hook. I swallowed it whole. I allowed myself to feel a flicker of genuine excitement. The beef bourguignon wasn't just food. It was a symbol of a time when things felt simpler, when the favoritism was a subtle texture of our lives, not the glaring, all-consuming main feature. I bought a nice bottle of wine to bring, a pricey French red that would pair perfectly with the dish. I even left work an hour early, something I rarely do. I walked into her house and the air was thick with the rich, savory aroma of the stew. My heart actually lifted. She was in the kitchen, fussing over the stove. "Happy birthday, sweetie," she said, giving me a quick one-armed hug before turning back to her pots. Ethan was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through his phone as usual. He grunted a "hey, happy birthday" without looking up. Standard. We sat down for dinner and my mom served the stew. It was incredible. For the first 20 minutes things felt almost normal. I talked a little about a project at work and she seemed to be listening. She asked a few questions. The wine was poured and the mood was light. I started to relax, thinking that maybe, just maybe, she had meant what she said. The night was actually about me. Then Ethan cleared his throat. It was the signal, the conversational turning point I should have seen coming from a mile away. "So, Mom," he began, pushing his empty bowl aside. "I had a call with that investor today. Things are looking really, really good for the new venture." My mother's entire posture shifted. She turned her body fully towards him, her eyes lighting up with that familiar, fervent glow. "Oh, Ethan, that's wonderful. Tell me everything." And just like that, I was invisible again. My orbit had decayed and I was adrift in space. The rest of the dinner and the entire evening was the Ethan show. He talked endlessly about his latest sure thing, a subscription box service for rare imported jerky. He used a lot of buzzwords like synergy, market disruption, and scalability. My mother hung on his every word, her face a mask of rapt adoration. "He's going to need a bit more capital to get it off the ground, of course," Ethan said, glancing at our mother. "The initial investment is solid, but to really scale, we need to front-load the inventory." My mother nodded eagerly. "Of course, sweetie, we'll make it work, we always do." I just sat there, swirling the wine in my glass, the delicious meal turning to ash in my stomach. The beef bourguignon, the symbol of my special night, had just become the catering for his business pitch. After about an hour of this, my mother stood up to clear the plates. "Oh, Liam, I almost forgot," she said, as if suddenly remembering. I was there. She went to the fridge and brought out a small, store-bought cupcake with a single, sad-looking candle stuck in it. She lit it and started singing Happy Birthday in a rushed, off-key voice. Ethan joined in, still looking at his phone. She set the cupcake in front of me. "Make a wish," she said, already turning her attention back to Ethan. "So about the down payment on that warehouse space you mentioned." That was it. That was the snap. The culmination of 32 years of being second best, of being the sensible, reliable placeholder in my own family. The promise of your night was not just broken, it had been cynically used as a stage for the same old play. I didn't yell, I didn't cause a scene. My voice, when it came out, was dangerously calm. "Mom," I said, my voice cutting through their conversation. They both looked at me, surprised by the interruption. "Do you remember what you said to me on the phone?" She blinked. "What, dear?" "You promised me that tonight would be about me, you promised." Her face immediately shifted into defensive mode. "And it has been. We made your favorite dinner." "No," I said, standing up. "You made dinner. And then you and he made the entire evening about his new company, just like you always do. My entire life it has always been about him. Every achievement I've ever had is a footnote, and every one of his failures is a national tragedy that requires all of your time, attention, and money. I am so tired of it." The air went cold. Ethan looked genuinely offended. My mother's expression hardened. "Liam, I think you're being incredibly ungrateful and dramatic," she said, her voice low and sharp. "Your brother is trying to build something and you're turning this into a pity party. On your own birthday, no less. It's selfish." "Selfish?" I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "I'm selfish for wanting one single night, the night you promised me, to not revolve around him and his endless financial needs. You used my birthday dinner as a business meeting." "That is a horrible thing to say," she shot back, her voice rising. "I love you both the same, and I have always treated you the same. You are imagining things. You've always been like this, so sensitive, twisting things to make yourself the victim." There it was, the script, the same lines she'd used my entire life. But this time I didn't back down. "No," I said, my voice shaking with repressed anger. "I'm not imagining the tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars you've given him. I'm not imagining the fact that you have never once in my adult life offered to help me with anything. I'm not imagining that you forgot my graduation day but flew across the country for his Vision Quest retreat." Her face went pale, then flushed with crimson. She looked at Ethan, then back at me, her eyes filled with a venom I had never seen before. "You need help, Liam," she hissed. "You're clearly not well. This paranoia, it's not normal. You're having some kind of breakdown." And with that sentence, she laid the cornerstone for the nightmare that was to come. She wasn't just defending herself, she was building a narrative to discredit me completely. I walked out without another word, leaving the pathetic cupcake with its unlit candle on the table. The war had begun, and I didn't even know it yet. The days following my birthday were shrouded in a thick, disorienting fog. I expected silence from my mother, a cooling-off period. What I got was a full-scale psychological assault. She didn't call me. Instead, she called everyone else. She launched a campaign, and the product she was selling was the story of my mental breakdown. It started with a call from my cousin Mark. His tone was a nauseating mix of pity and condescension. "Hey man, your mom called. She's really worried about you. Said you had some kind of episode at your birthday dinner. If you need to talk, I'm here." An episode, that's what my quiet, controlled confrontation had become. I tried to explain my side, but it was like trying to describe a color to someone who was born blind. His mind was already made up. "Yeah, I get it," he said, "but Sharon is just so torn up. She thinks it might be burnout from your job." The calls kept coming, an uncle, a family friend. Each one delivered a variation of the same message. "Your mother is worried, you're not yourself, you need to get help." She was methodically poisoning the well, framing my legitimate grievances as the ravings of an unstable mind. The gaslighting was no longer just between us, it was being crowdsourced. She was building an army of believers, and their collective concern was a battering ram against my sanity. The worst part was, it started to work. I'd lie awake at night, replaying the dinner over and over. Did I yell? No. Did I overreact? Maybe. Her words, echoed by so many others, began to seep into the cracks of my confidence. "You're being far too sensitive. You're twisting things. You need help." Was I the one who was wrong? Had I spent a lifetime misinterpreting her actions? The human mind craves consistency, and when your reality is completely at odds with what everyone you know is telling you, it's easier to question yourself than to question all of them. I felt like I was losing my grip. I started to doubt my own memories, my own feelings. The data points of my life were being corrupted, and the story they told was becoming blurry and unreliable. I was isolated, and my own mind was turning into a prison. Just as I felt myself slipping into a genuine state of depression and self-doubt, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I recognized but hadn't communicated with in months. My Aunt Carol. The text was simple: "Liam, are you free to talk? I have something you need to hear." Her timing felt like a lifeline thrown into a churning sea. I agreed immediately, and she called a few minutes later. Her voice was calm and steady, a stark contrast to the emotional chaos swirling inside me. She didn't ask how I was, she didn't mention my mother's concern. She got straight to the point. "I spoke with your mother yesterday," Carol began. "She told me all about your birthday dinner. She told me you were unstable, paranoid, and that you'd fabricated a lifetime of persecution." I braced myself for more of the same, another voice telling me to get help. "And I knew she was lying," Carol continued, and I felt a jolt of shock. "Because she said the exact same things about me 20 years ago." I was speechless. Carol went on to explain that she and Sharon had a massive falling out when they were in their 30s. Carol had confronted Sharon about her manipulative behavior and her tendency to borrow money without paying it back. Sharon's response was to launch an identical campaign against her. She told the entire family that Carol was emotionally volatile, prone to making things up, and deeply troubled. She isolates anyone who calls her out on her behavior, Carol said, her voice tinged with a long-dormant sadness. She turns the family against them by painting them as crazy. It's her ultimate defense mechanism. If the accuser isn't credible, the accusation doesn't matter. It was as if someone had turned on a light in the pitch-black room of my confusion. The patterns, the script, it wasn't about me. It had never been about me. It was a pre-written play she dusted off whenever her perfect world was threatened. I wish I had stepped in sooner, Liam, Carol said, her voice heavy with regret. I saw what she was doing to you and Ethan over the years, but I kept my distance after what happened to me. I didn't want to get caught in her web again. That was a mistake, and I'm sorry. I finally found my voice. I thought I was going crazy, Carol. I know, she replied softly. That's the point, that's how she wins. Then she said the words that would change everything. I saved something from back then, voicemails from our other sister, Sarah, who lived out of state. Sharon had been calling her, feeding her the same lines about me. After Sarah and I talked, she forwarded them to me. I never deleted them. I think you should listen to them. A minute later, a series of audio files appeared in my text messages. My hands were shaking as I pressed play on the first one. It was my mother's voice, but a version from 2 decades ago, slightly younger, but with the same cadence, the same practiced, concerned tone. Sarah, I'm so worried about Carol, the voice said. She had a complete meltdown. She's accusing me of all these horrible things, twisting everything from our childhood. I think she's having a breakdown. She's just so paranoid, and she's always been the sensitive one, you know. I played the next one and the next. It was the same script, the same keywords, meltdown, twisting things, paranoid, sensitive, needs help. She was describing me, but she was talking about her sister. It was undeniable, irrefutable proof. It was a recording of her playbook. The fog in my mind didn't just lift, it was obliterated by a nuclear blast of clarity. Every doubt, every shred of guilt, every feeling of insanity vanished. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't oversensitive. I was right. I had been right all along. The relief was so overwhelming that I started to cry deep, ragged sobs of validation. It was the sound of a prisoner who had just been handed the key to his own cell. The recordings were more than just old voicemails. They were a Rosetta Stone that translated 30 years of confusing, painful behavior into a single, understandable language, manipulation. And as the tears subsided, a new feeling began to crystallize in their place. A cold, hard, and perfectly clear emotion. It wasn't anger anymore, it was resolve. She had tried to break my mind to protect her lies. Now I was going to use her own words, her own history, to break her reality. The data was in, it was time for the analysis. The day after hearing those recordings was the first day of the rest of my life. The world looked different, sharper. The constant, low-grade hum of self-doubt that had been my lifelong companion was gone. In its place was a quiet, focused determination. My first call was to Aunt Carol. We spoke for over 2 hours, and for the first time, it felt like I was talking to a true ally, someone who had navigated the same treacherous waters and come out the other side. She never changes, Liam, Carol said, her voice a mixture of sadness and grim acceptance. Her world is built around the image of herself as a perfect, self-sacrificing mother. Anyone who threatens that image becomes an enemy that must be neutralized. She explained the fallout from their confrontation 2 decades ago, how family members had treated her with suspicion and pity for years, how it took her a long time to rebuild those relationships and some were never fully repaired. She had chosen peace over war, moving to a different town and keeping a safe distance. I didn't have proof like you do now, she said. It was my word against hers, and she was always the more convincing actress. Her story gave me the context I needed. This wasn't a recent development or a reaction to my specific accusations. This was a deep-seated pathological pattern of behavior. My data analyst brain kicked into high gear. A single data point can be an anomaly. 2 data points suggest a trend. It was time to find more data. Carol, I said, an idea forming in my mind. I need to understand the full scope of this, especially the financial side with Ethan. That's her biggest blind spot. Be careful, Liam, she warned. She guards that information like a dragon. But I had an advantage. A few years back, after a minor health scare, my mother had asked me to help her organize her digital accounts. You're so good with computers, she'd said. She had given me a list of passwords for her email and online banking, just in case of an emergency. I had stored them in a secure password manager and forgotten about them. This, I realized, was the emergency she had unknowingly prepared me for. It felt ethically gray, but I reasoned that she had subjected me to psychological warfare. A forensic accounting of the damage felt justified. That evening, I logged into her main email account. My heart pounded as the inbox loaded. It felt like a massive violation of privacy, but I knew it was the only way to get the unbiased truth. I started with a simple search for Ethan's name. The results were a tidal wave. For years, there had been a steady stream of emails from him, all variations on a theme. They would start with a grand vision for a new project, followed by a request for a small loan or seed capital. Then would come the excuses for why the previous venture failed, always blaming external factors. A bad market, unreliable partners, a global pandemic that had nothing to do with his dog treat business. And my mother's replies were always the same: unwavering support, promises of funds, and loving encouragement. "Don't you worry, sweetie, we'll find the money, I believe in you." I started cross-referencing these emails with her online banking statements. The picture that emerged was staggering. It wasn't just a few thousand here and there. It was a systematic draining of her life savings, my father's legacy. There were wire transfers labeled business investment, credit cards paid off monthly with balances in the tens of thousands, and even a record of a home equity loan she had taken out. I began to compile everything into a spreadsheet, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I created a timeline. Date, Ethan's request, amount, source of funds, stated purpose, outcome. The outcome column was a bleak repeating litany: failed, abandoned, money lost. I calculated a running total. It was well over $350,000, all of it gone, vaporized by Ethan's incompetence and my mother's blind enabling. But the financial data was only part of the story. The emails revealed another layer of her manipulation. I found emails to my Aunt Sarah, the same one from the voicemails, and other relatives. In them, she would lament how difficult and distant I was. "Liam is so cold sometimes," she wrote in one email to a cousin. "He's very judgmental about Ethan's ambitions. It's sad, I think he's jealous." She was preemptively building a narrative about me years before our confrontation, casting me as the cold, unsupportive son to amplify Ethan as the warm, ambitious one. She wasn't just reacting to threats. She was constantly managing her public image, ensuring everyone saw the version of the family she wanted them to see. The most damning piece of evidence I found was a draft email, one she never sent. It was dated 2 days after my birthday dinner. It was addressed to me. It was a long, rambling, and vicious tirade filled with accusations and vitriol. She called me ungrateful, mentally unbalanced, and cruel, she wrote. "You have always had a dark streak in you, and I can no longer stand by and watch you try to tear this family apart with your delusions." The final line was, "Your father would be so ashamed of you." She had never sent it, likely deciding her whisper campaign was more effective than a direct written attack that I could save as proof. But in her haste, she hadn't deleted the draft. It was a raw, unfiltered look into her true feelings, devoid of the sweet, concerned mask she wore for everyone else. I saved everything: the emails, the bank statements, the unsent draft. I transcribed the voicemails Carol had sent me. I organized it all into a single, cohesive presentation, a chronological narrative of manipulation, financial ruin, and emotional abuse backed by undeniable, time-stamped evidence. I laid out the pattern of lies so clearly that no one could deny it. Looking at the finished file on my computer, I felt a sense of cold, hard clarity. This wasn't just about my feelings anymore. This was about the truth. My mother had built her entire world on a carefully constructed narrative of lies. I was about to show her, and the rest of the family, that data doesn't lie. With a mountain of evidence compiled, the question became not what to do but how. Another one-on-one confrontation was pointless. She would just deny, deflect, and double down on the mental breakdown narrative. Sending a group email felt cowardly and would allow people to ignore it or discuss it privately, letting her control the spin. No, the truth needed to be presented in a forum she couldn't escape, in a way that was public, immediate, and irrefutable. The metaphorical television for this broadcast would be her own 40th wedding anniversary party. It was, of course, an anniversary she was celebrating alone, but my mother had never let my father's passing stop her from marking the occasion. Every year, she hosted a large gathering for family and friends to celebrate their love and honor his memory. In reality, it was a party to celebrate herself, the grieving but strong widow, the matriarch holding the family together. It was her annual coronation, and it was the perfect stage. The party was in 3 weeks. I called Carol and laid out my plan. Her first reaction was a sharp intake of breath. "Liam, that's bold. You'll be dropping a bomb in the middle of her favorite day of the year." "Her favorite day is built on a lie just like everything else," I replied, my voice steady. "It's the only way to make sure everyone hears the truth at the same time from the same source. No more whispers, no more spin." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "You're right," Carol finally said, a new strength in her voice. "She's controlled the narrative for too long. What do you need from me?" "Just be there," I said, "and be ready." My plan was simple, and I used my professional skills to organize it. I wasn't going to stand up and scream. I was going to deliver a presentation, calmly, methodically, like I was presenting findings to a board of directors. The centerpiece of my mother's living room was a large smart TV mounted above the fireplace, which she always used for a slideshow of photos of her and my dad during the party. I would use that television. I bought a specific streaming device that could be plugged into an HDMI port and controlled from my phone. It was small and discreet. My plan was to arrive early, under the pretense of helping set up and plug it in. I spent the next 3 weeks refining my presentation. I didn't want it to be a chaotic jumble of accusations. It needed to be a story. I started with a title slide, "The Family You See and the Family That Is, a Story in 3 Acts." I was titled The Pattern. This section would begin with the audio files from Aunt Carol. I edited the audio, overlaying the sound waves on a black screen with a transcript appearing in white text as the words were spoken. I would play my mother's 20-year-old voicemails about Carol being paranoid and having a breakdown. Then I would transition to the transcribed text messages and quotes from family members who had called me recently, showing the exact same script being deployed against me. It was a powerful side-by-side comparison that showed the pattern beyond any doubt. Act II was the financials. This was my spreadsheet transformed into a series of clean, easy-to-read charts and graphs, a bar chart showing the money given to Ethan year by year, a pie chart showing the breakdown of her depleted savings, a timeline of his failed businesses, each one linked to a major withdrawal from her accounts. I didn't add commentary. The numbers spoke for themselves, stark and brutal. I included screenshots of the key emails, highlighting Ethan's requests and my mother's enthusiastic agreements. Act III, the finale, was titled The Truth. This section would feature only one thing, the unsent draft of the email she had written to me. I would put the entire text on the screen, letting the raw cruelty of her words, dark streak, delusions. Your father would be so ashamed, hang in the air for everyone to read themselves. It was the emotional dagger, the proof that her public face of the loving, concerned mother was a complete fabrication. I rehearsed my speaking parts, I timed everything. I made sure my tone was not angry or hysterical but factual and disappointed. I was the analyst presenting the data, not the victim screaming for justice. This was crucial. If I showed too much emotion, it would feed into her narrative that I was unstable. The power was in the cold, hard evidence. The day of the party arrived. I felt a strange sense of calm. I had the truth in a folder on my phone. I dressed in a simple button-down shirt and slacks. I looked normal. I looked sane. I arrived an hour early carrying a box of decorations I'd offered to bring. As my mother directed me to put them up, I accidentally dropped the TV remote behind the entertainment center. While I was crouched down, supposedly looking for it, I plugged my streaming device into a spare HDMI port. It took less than 10 seconds. The trap was set. Guests started to arrive. Cousins, uncles, old family friends, they all greeted me with that same look of cautious pity. They had all been briefed. I was the unstable son, the ticking time bomb they had to be careful around. I smiled politely, made small talk, and watched as my mother held court, basking in the sympathy and attention. Ethan was by her side, of course, looking smug. He had just received another investment for his jerky business, and he felt invincible. The slideshow of my parents looped on the TV, a silent, smiling testament to a past that my mother had curated and edited to her liking. I let the party go on for about an hour and a half until everyone had arrived and had a drink in their hand. Then I took a deep breath, pulled out my phone, and switched the TV's input to my device. The smiling photos of my parents vanished, replaced by a black screen with white text. The family you see and the family that is, a story in 3 acts. The sudden change on the screen silenced the room. The soft music playing from the speakers was cut off by the first audio file. My mother's voice, younger but unmistakable, filled her own living room, speaking from 20 years in the past. So worried about Carol, she's accusing me of all these horrible things. I think she's having a breakdown. A collective gasp went through the crowd. I saw my mother's head whip around towards the television, her smile frozen on her face. Her eyes darted around the room, trying to locate the source of this betrayal. She saw me standing by the wall, my phone in my hand, my expression neutral. Her face, for a split second, registered pure, undiluted fury. I didn't give her time to react. I started speaking, my voice calm and clear, amplified slightly by the small Bluetooth speaker I had in my pocket. Good evening, everyone. Forgive the interruption. My mother has always said this day is about honoring my father's memory and celebrating family. And family, above all, should be about truth. So I'd like to take a few minutes to share a little bit of our family's truth. The room was dead silent. Every eye was on me or the screen. I saw my Aunt Carol standing near the back, giving me a small, determined nod. As the voicemails about Carol played out, I could see the older family members exchanging confused, shocked glances. They remembered that time. They remembered Sharon's stories about her troubled sister. Now, hearing the actual words, the calculated manipulation, was a completely different experience. When the old voicemails ended, the screen transitioned. The same script 20 years later, the text read. Then came the quotes from my recent phone calls. From Uncle David, she said you had some kind of episode. From Cousin Mark, she's just so torn up, thinks it might be burnout. My mother tried to interrupt. Liam, what is the meaning of this? Stop this nonsense right now, my guests. Your guests deserve to know the truth, I said, my voice cutting her off cleanly. Please, Mom, let the presentation speak for itself. She was so stunned by my refusal to back down that she was momentarily silenced. Ethan looked pale and was staring at me with a mixture of disbelief and panic. I moved to Act II, the financials. The first chart appeared on screen, a stark bar graph showing over $350,000 in investments to Ethan over the last decade. A low murmur rippled through the family. These were people who had been told I was the cold, jealous one. Now they were seeing the staggering financial reality of the favoritism I had tried to describe. I clicked through the slides showing the failed business timeline, the screenshots of Ethan's wheedling emails, my mother's depleted accounts, the home equity loan. I provided no commentary, letting the data do the talking. I saw my uncle, who worked in finance, shaking his head slowly, his expression grim. He was understanding the numbers all too well. My mother found her voice again, this time filled with frantic rage. This is private information, you hacked me, this is illegal, someone turn that off. A few people shifted uncomfortably, but no one moved. They were captivated. The perfect image of Sharon, the selfless matriarch, was cracking before their very eyes. Ethan finally spoke up, his voice cracking. This is all lies, he's twisting things. Is this a lie? I asked calmly and clicked to the next slide. It was a screenshot of an email from Ethan to a friend which I had found in my mother's sent folder because she had been logged into his account on her computer. In it, he was bragging. My mom is my personal ATM, he wrote. She'll believe anything I tell her. The jerky business is just a way to fund my trip to Thailand this winter. The air was sucked out of the room. Ethan's face went from pale to ghostly white. My mother looked at him, her expression a mess of confusion and horror. This was a betrayal even she couldn't process. He had been playing her too. Finally, I moved to Act III. And now for the truth, I said, my voice softening with genuine sadness. This is not about money, it's about how this family treats its own. It's about the stories we tell ourselves and the stories we tell others. The text of the unsent email filled the screen. You have always had a dark streak. Your father would be so ashamed of you. I let the words hang in the silent room for a full minute. This was the emotional core of it all. This was the venom behind the sweet smile. I looked directly at my mother. Her face had collapsed. The anger was gone, replaced by a raw, gaping look of exposure. She was naked, stripped of all her lies and manipulations in front of everyone she had spent a lifetime trying to impress. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. I turned off the presentation. The TV screen went black. My mother told all of you I was having a mental breakdown because I had the courage to tell her the truth, I said, my voice steady. She tried to destroy my credibility and my sanity to avoid taking responsibility for her own actions. The evidence you just saw is not the product of a breakdown. It's the product of clarity. I looked around the room at the stunned faces of my family. I'm not asking you to pick a side, I'm just presenting the facts. What you do with them is up to you. And with that, I set my phone down, walked to the front door and left. I didn't look back. As I closed the door behind me, I heard the first shouts erupting. The reckoning had begun. I didn't go home. I went to a quiet bar near my apartment, ordered a drink, and sat there, letting the adrenaline slowly seep out of my body. My phone started vibrating almost immediately, a relentless barrage of texts and calls. I ignored them all. For the first time in my life, I wasn't interested in their reactions, their opinions, or their drama. I had presented the data. The conclusions were theirs to draw. I had reclaimed my own narrative, and in doing so, I had disconnected myself from the outcome. The first person I responded to was Aunt Carol, who texted me about an hour later. Are you okay? I am, I wrote back, and I was surprised by how true it was. How bad is it in there? Her reply came instantly. Apocalyptic. Sharon had a full-blown meltdown, a real one, screaming, crying, accusing everyone. Ethan bolted out the back door about 10 minutes after you left. Half the family is arguing, the other half just looks shell-shocked. You didn't just drop a bomb, you leveled the entire city. A few minutes later, she added, several people have asked for your number. They want to talk to you, to apologize. Over the next few days, the apologies trickled in. My uncle who worked in finance called. Liam, I am so sorry, he said, his voice thick with shame. We listened to her. We just believed her, seeing those numbers, seeing that email. There's no excuse. I should have known better. I should have reached out to you. I accepted his apology and others like it. They were genuine. These were not bad people. They were just people who had been expertly manipulated for decades by a master. The family split as I knew it would. A small faction, mostly older relatives caught in my mother's orbit for their entire lives, sided with her. They called me cruel and heartless for airing our dirty laundry and humiliating your mother. I blocked their numbers. They were clinging to the fiction because the truth was too uncomfortable. The majority, however, were horrified. They had been forced to see the truth behind the curtain and they couldn't unsee it. My relationship with my mother and brother was, of course, over. She sent me a string of furious, rambling texts alternating between threats, guilt, trips, and bizarre declarations of love. It was the flailing of a narcissist who had lost control. I read them not with anger but with a detached sense of pity. Then I blocked her number too. I blocked Ethan. I cut the cord completely and finally. Aunt Carol became my true family. We started having dinner once a week. We talked about everything, her experiences, my childhood, books, life. We were two survivors of the same storm and we found a quiet, stable peace in each other's company. You know, she told me one evening, you didn't just save yourself, you validated my reality too. For 20 years, I've carried a little piece of doubt, wondering if maybe I was the crazy one. You destroyed that doubt. You gave me my history back. My life became quiet, peaceful. The constant draining energy I had spent managing my family situation was now mine to reinvest in myself. My work improved. I started dating someone, a wonderful woman who was kind and emotionally mature. When she asked about my family, I told her the truth simply and without drama. I have a great aunt, I said. The rest are not in my life. She accepted it, no questions asked. Months later, I learned through the family grapevine that my mother had sold her house. The financial hole Ethan had dug was too deep to ignore once the truth was out. There was no one left to enable her, no one to believe her stories. She moved to a small condo in a different state, closer to where Ethan had fled. The reports I heard were that they were living a small, bitter life, two people in a toxic codependency, blaming the world for their problems. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, no sadness. They were just data points from a closed project. My revenge was never about destroying them. It was about reclaiming myself. For 32 years, my mother had defined my reality, told me who I was, what I felt, and what I was worth. Her gaslighting was a poison that made me doubt my own mind. The confrontation at the party wasn't an act of hate, it was an act of truth. I didn't destroy her. I simply held up a mirror and forced her and everyone else to look at her reflection. If she shattered, it was because the image was built on lies. I still work with data every day, finding patterns in the chaos. But now the most important data set, my own life, is clean, organized, and finally makes sense. The trend line is pointing up.